Hello, my name is Tim Wilson, and I'm the UF Extension St. Johns County Director and Production Agricultural Agent. Do you own or are thinking of buying a few acres in St. Johns County and starting an agricultural business? If so, the Living on a Few Acres program in St. Johns County may be the right educational program for you. This program has been designed to provide a brief 45-minute to 1 hour introductory educational program on a variety of agricultural topics such as raising backyard chickens, pasture, beef, and pond management. Other topics might include peaches, muscadine grapes, or cottage food laws. Today's program will cover sheep and goat production and will be presented by Jonelle Vasquez, our UF Extension Hardy County Agricultural Agent. Jonah?
Good morning. My name is Jonah Vasquez. I'm an extension agent in Hardy County. I am one of the members of the Central Florida Livestock Agents Group. And today we're going to be talking about fundamentals of sheep and goat production in Florida. And this is part of a series of web recordings or web educational tools that we're producing for you guys. Today we're going to be talking small ruminants, okay? We're going to mainly focus on sheep and goats, parasite management, fundamentals of why or why not to have them on our farm, etc. That I'm showing in the board for you. This is Syria, Iraq, Iran, that cradle of civilization here. You can see that hogs, cows, sheep, goats were all domesticated in the same region. And it looks pretty similar to Florida, would you say? I don't think so. It really looks rugged, a lot of geographical features that are very distinct and very opposite of what we can find here, a lot of rocky terrain. So that creates a challenge for some of us dealing with the physiology of these animals, bringing them to Florida, having sandy soils, not rocky soils, having flat woods, and standing water where they evolved. It doesn't look like they had much of a lot of lush pastures. So we have a lot of challenges, and those challenges can be overcome. We've had herds of sheep and goats here for over 400 years, so that means that genetic selection needs to be in place, and survival of our stock will depend on the decisions that we make. So talking about those decisions, here are the top 10 reasons why you have to stop here and think about, do I want to continue with my sheep and goat operation or not? Anyway, so my first reason why not to invest in sheep and goats is that you have to be smarter than everything else that wants to eat it. It's dogs, we're talking about coyotes, we're talking about bear, we're talking about humans sometimes. So we have to keep them secure. We're talking about internal parasites as well. So there's a lot of challenge. You have to be smarter than the goat. And that sometimes doesn't seem like it's a normal behavior for us. And those animals, sheep and goats, can outsmart us if we are not looking. We have parasite problems associated with our geography, our latitude. We have introduced this livestock. We have selected them from other regions. We bring them from the Midwest to hot and humid Florida, and that can cause some stress for the animals. Parasites take over, and we tend to lose a lot of money. This goes with number one. We have a lot of predators around. With urban encroachment, we all want to live near wildlife, near water, and sometimes that will create some issues with our animals. Keeping them alive, keeping them secure is a big deal. Talk about fencing. Cattle fencing is not going to keep sheep and goats in place. So if we're thinking about managing these animals, we have to think that we're keeping different livestock than beef cattle, dairy cattle, horses. So sometimes we have to modify these environments. Hoof problems, it's a big deal. I would say it's number 2 in my list of issues that people have with sheep and goats. Is trimming those hooves. They evolved in rocky terrain, and we don't have a whole lot of rocky terrain in Florida. So wearing those hooves while feeding them nutritious feeds, it's going to be an issue. So we have to monitor the length of those hooves and how we are managing them. Hoof diseases can have a big impact on our herd. Long hooves can cause joint problems, can cause unnecessary stress, and we can also genetically select for easy keepers. So think of that. Weather problems. Talk about rainy season. We're expecting to have a very active hurricane season. So that brings a lot of rain, a lot of standing water, a lot of parasites, and that can be a problem when you're talking about kidding, when we're talking about gastrointestinal parasite management. So another reason to think about what we're doing. So 8th reason is lack of infrastructure. There's no unified front for marketing and promotion of sheep and goat meat, milk, or other products. So thinking about that as either a threat or an opportunity in the sheep and goat world. Higher labor requirements. If you came into this as your retirement plan and you have back issues, again, with cows, you don't have to trim those hooves ever sometimes. With sheep and goat, you do. We talk about dairy animals. They have a requirement for you to milk those animals on a regular basis. So these are some of the requirements in terms of management that we have to think about. Then you're not going to get rich quick. On average, we're talking about maybe 200 females in a typical break-even scenario. That's a lot of goats. That's a lot of sheep. For you to think about where your break-even is, and you have to analyze your costs of production, and if this is where how far you are from breaking even, or when you will break even. So maybe hobby is a better option for you, but there's, like I said before, there's a lot of opportunity out there to make money, to make investment in this area as well. So trust but verify, research where your niche is, where you fit in the market, and then move forward with an educated information, I guess, or data. First thing we have to talk about, we talked about genetic selection. We start with some animals, some females that can stay in the herd or the flock for a long time. So the first thing that you do is that you select some young stock with good conformation that can stand your management. We're not talking about that companion animal. We're talking about a livestock production system. Okay. Um, so the first thing that we have to look at is going to be the age of that animal. So I've given you a guide here on how to determine the age based on the teeth, or look at that denture and see if it's under a year. It'll have all its milk teeth. 1 to 1.5 years, it'll shed those front teeth. Uh, and then it'll regrow some permanent ones, and so on. You can follow what I'm trying to convey with this slide. So that chart is pretty good when you're looking at buying some females to start your goat and also sheep operation. So we think about what do our animals need. What are those basic needs for sheep and goat? So the first one is going to be proper shelter, a place where they can feel safe, where they can thrive, free of stressors from neighbors' dogs and predators, weathering the elements, etc. Second one would be adequate food. When we talk about adequate food or feed, we think about the forage. We think about what that forage is offering in terms of nutrition. We have to test for that because that comprises the majority of what they will use for nourishment. So we need to test our forage, and then we also need to match or reevaluate the effectiveness of our supplemental feed that we feed in basis of concentrate feed, etc. We feed out of a bag or a bale. So think about those, if those are meeting the nutritional requirements of those animals. Parasite control. In Florida, we have a mess when it comes to climatic factors. We're very humid in the summertime. In some areas, water table just races all the way up, and that creates an issue for parasites. Parasites, gastrointestinal parasites are a major problem. So instead of thinking about control, we can think about management strategies that we can employ when we have high loads of parasites. How do we know if we have high loads of parasites? We can fecal test. We can also genetically select for easy keepers, meaning that from our herd, we're going to select those animals that come from that mother and that father that has proven to have genetically superior animals. Social interaction is another big deal. These animals are social creatures, so they have that herd instinct, and we should not get in the way. We should provide that opportunity for them to socialize among themselves, and that brings, the stress level usually will diminish when we have that social interaction need met. The other thing would be healthy immunity. Immunity is very important. We often encounter people that are buying 3 and 4 month old kids in the sale barn. Those kids are at the bottom of their immunity. It's like they're starting to develop their own immunity, starting to lose the immunity inherited from their mothers. Those are the worst time for us to buy kids. Okay, so think about that immune system. Again, this is something that we can select for. This is something that we can manage, and culling weak animals is always an option. Overall, we need to have a safe environment that goes with proper shelter and parasite control, etc. This everything that we've talked about. Safety of those animals. If we cannot keep them in a pen, they seem to escape from us. Maybe we need to reevaluate if this is what we need to be doing moving forward. They don't need love. These are livestock. This is livestock that we're talking about. They don't need to be petted. They can live in perfect. They will be happy in a pasture because that's what they were bred for. So they don't need to be loved. They don't need their nails to be painted. They don't need to be kissed. These are animals that developed and thrive eating grass, grapevines, just kicking around in the dirt. So in terms of shelter, we don't need to have an expensive enclosure for them. If you have a barn, that's perfect. They just need to be shaded from the wind, especially in the wintertime around kidding or lambing. That's when we need that shelter in place, so the animals can protect themselves from the elements. So for an average sheep and goat herd, in terms of body size, we want to have 15 square feet of bedding per animal. This is important. We cannot have them too crammed. There are some animals that are smaller framed than others based on their genetic makeup and breed. So that's a factor that you need to consider. Fencing. We recommend a two-fence system, an exterior fence that keeps everybody in your property, and then an interior fencing that we also call cross fencing. The idea is to have the opportunity to rotate pastures and distribute manure, have a more controlled grazing or browsing behavior from our animals, and this is going to positively affect our grasses, our forages, our soil, and also our animals. We keep them moving from paddock to paddock. That way they keep defecating, and that feces is going to decompose, and we can then manage the amount of reinfection with gastrointestinal parasites based on our cross fencing. There's a lot of information on that. So this is basically the recommended fencing layout for electric fence or barbed wire. If that's what you're wanting to use, I would strongly recommend electric fencing. I would also recommend you look into those movable fences, so temporary fences that you can rotate with the animals. If you want more information, just let us know and we can talk about that specifically. But basically what we want is to have those animals in place where you want them, grazing on that paddock that needs to be grazed, and then letting the rest of the farm rest. So we talked about that net fencing. That's that temporary fence that we can invest in. Goats love to climb, but when you have electricity, that will discourage them from climbing. Okay, if you have a good grounding system, that they will be discouraged from going in, and interacting with the fence and getting electrocuted. It's not electrocuted; it's just sapped. Other things, a lot of people buy the cart before the horse. I would recommend us investing in handling facilities, especially when we talk about hoof trimming, administering dewormers, disbudding, etc. The least that you can have is going to be a stanchion like the one in the picture. That picture is me a long time ago when I was young and beautiful. Anyway, so our goal is to immobilize the animal, not to torture the animal, but just to keep that animal safe so we can handle and we can administer what that animal needs. Okay, that's it. And there's a lot of information online on things that we can build, specs that we can work with to keep our animals safe and secure while we are performing, our management practices in benefit of those animals. So ruminants include cattle, sheep, goats, giraffes, hippos, elephants, deer. What is a ruminant? A ruminant is an animal, it's a mammal that has a modified gastrointestinal system where we have pre-gastric chambers. Okay, so we have a way to process that grass, and how ruminants do it is that in that rumen, reticulum, and omasum, those are the chambers where the ruminants have bacteria, microbes that basically digest the grass that we offer them. Okay, so after the grass is digested, those microbes grow inside of them and they secrete fatty acids. Those microbes become part of the diet of the ruminant, and also of course the grass. So we have these animals that are awesome at eating something that is inedible to humans and turning it into meat, turning it into milk, turning it into wool. So that's why sheep and goats are so awesome. In Florida, a friend of mine used to say we can grow grass, and that's one of the major things on why we should keep these animals. We can grow grass, but we need ruminants to harvest that grass, and that's why we have such a nice thriving cattle industry here, and there's a potential for ruminants as well. If you look at that picture that just popped up, that is called a reticulum. That's that chamber, that first chamber here. So if you follow the arrows, the red arrows, that's the bolus, that grass that the animal just ingested goes into the reticulum, then that bolus goes into the rumen, where it keeps fermenting and the microbes keep feeding on it, and then it goes back into the mouth for a second chewing, and then into the omasum and abomasum, where it gets digested. So it's a complicated process that makes these animals even more impressive. So we talked about nutrition a little bit. We can provide, extension agents can provide for you those nutritional requirements that those animals have. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of detail in this slide, but I'm just wanting to express my 2 cents here. We need to know where the needs of those animals are so we can meet them. So, and there's a lot of research and there's a lot of data that has been collected for that, and there's tools that have been developed for those specific needs, those specific requirements that those animals have. So we can supply you with that information. These are the needs, this is the quality of our grass, this is the quality of our supplement, and we can marry those pieces of information and we can then come up with a ration specifically for your herd or flock. With us on that. In Florida, our recommendation is that for 1 acre of pasture, depending on the frame size of those animals, we talk about putting 4 to 6 sheep or goats in that acre. In reality, the recommendation for stocking rate, which is what we're talking about now, stocking rate is measured in animal units. So 1 animal unit is equal to 1,000 pounds of body weight, and for that 1,000 pounds of body weight that we can produce in Florida, an average of yield to supply that animal its metabolic needs with 2 acres of pasture. So in summary, we measure animal units. 1 animal unit is 1,000 pounds, and we have 1,000 pounds of body weight for every 2 acres of pasture. We're talking about full sun pastures without oaks, without houses, without a lot of these things that take up some of that yield that would be grass. Okay, so how many animals can I keep in an acre? It depends. Okay, that's the short answer here. So it will depend on the frame size of those of your herd or flock. It will depend on the makeup composition of that pasture, and then it will also depend on another factor, which is your management style of that forage that is in the growing in the soil. Okay, so are you having a rotational grazing scheme? Are you continuous grazing? All of those things can be modified and tweaked so you can increase your yields based on that, on some of those management practices. If there's a pond, if there's a house or a barn, then we have issues that we have to adjust and reduce those animals per acre. So think about rotational grazing versus continuous grazing. And we talked about a lot of these considerations earlier. But when you're thinking about rotational grazing, you have to calculate how many paddocks you're going to need to allow that grass to rest for a minimum of 21 days. And this will help that grass recover from that grazing that took a lot of that leaf mass out of that plant. So that plant now has to build back those that leaf tissue, and also the sugar reserves it took out of the root system or whatever the tissue was being stored, and replenish itself, regenerate itself. So think about that, and your extension agent can come out and work on a plant with you. Okay, that's one of the advantages. That's why we pay taxes, so we can go out to your farm and help you troubleshoot some of those things that we don't know. So another factor is that we tend to treat our sheep and goats like they were something else. We buy a piece of land in somewhere in Florida, and it was perimeter, it had a perimeter fence. Okay, um, but before we bought that place, there were cows in there. Okay, so we think that sheep and goats are gonna behave like cows, but mainly they are going to have a different preference. Okay, so we can think about that, we can plan for that, and we can make modifications to your existing property based on what they would prefer to have. So if we look at horses, horses enjoy having in their diet 6% browse. We're talking about browse. We're talking about oak leaves and grapevines and things that are grazed or eaten above the neckline. Okay, that those are browse, so bushes and stuff like that. 6% browse, 4% weeds, broadleaf weeds, and then 90% grass. So they almost strictly enjoy eating grass. Beef cattle, they like a little bit more variety, 70% grass, 10% browse, and 20% weeds. Goats, they like 60% browse. That means that, grazing on tall things like sunflowers, they go into the woods and they enjoy eating briars and grapevines and things like that, wax myrtles, coconut grass sometimes. 20% weeds and 20% grass. And then sheep, they are probably the closest that behave like cattle with 60% grass preference, 10% browse, and 30% weed preference. So water, it's 80%, 90% of our forages. But it's also going to be a big chunk of the body weight of that animal. So water, replenishing that animal's storage areas, or replenishing that animal of that water that we dissipate based on our respiration, etc., is very important for maintaining a good metabolism. So the rule of thumb in amount of water that we drink, it's not that important as the amount of water that you have available and the quality. Okay, if we can have an automatic waterer in place that guarantees that water is going to be there 24/7, that's perfect. If well, the rule of thumb in terms of water is going to be, if you are not enticed as a producer to drink that water, do not offer it to the animals. Meaning that that water trough needs to be cleaned regularly, the water temperature needs to be cool, and that water needs to be plentiful, like we said, and hopefully that smells okay. If you're in well water, that sometimes is a challenge, but the animals will get used to that sulfur smell. That's not that big of a deal. When you have things growing in the water trough, that's when we have problems. Okay, never allow your animals to drink out of open water sources like streams, if possible, or ponds, surface water, because they might get sick with bugs, stomach bugs, or endoparasites as well. So in terms of reproduction, sheep and goats are pretty standard. They're very similar. Okay, ewes and doelings will reach puberty about 5 to 8 months of age, depending on that breed. on that composition. 60% of that adult body weight is what we're looking for. We're going to use 1 to 20, 1 to 25 bucks per doe, and 1 to 20 to 30 rams per ewe. Most of those breeds are going to be seasonally polyestrous, so meaning that they're going to cycle based on the amount of daylight that we have available. So that breeding season in Florida in sheep is going to be from August to December. In goats is going to be from July to December. So when the daylight the day length is reducing, that's when they typically kickstart that cycling again. Tropical breeds such as Nubians and some of that boar, they will tend to cycle pretty throughout the year, basically. Average cycle length in sheep is going to be about 17 days. In goats is going to be about 21. Ovulation, like all cycles, is going to be towards the end of the cycle. The estrus, which is when that ovule or that ova is expelled and available for conception, in sheep is going to be 24 to 36 hours. For goats, it's going to be 24 to 48. Again, everything is based on genetics. So the ovulation, it will be between 1 and 3 eggs, for both species, and fertilization will follow that ovulation, of course, from 10 to 25 hours after that ovulation. Gestation length is going to be for both species 147 to 155 days after exposure, so about 5 months. And we can test for that, if that animal is going to be bred or not. There are some products out there, and I've used some of that ultrasounding machines, the Prectones. For the amount of money that you end up buying for something that looks like a pregnancy, but it's not a definite 99% accurate pregnancy, I would be very careful in terms of buying one of these the Prectones or the pregnancy sounding machines. You are looking for a vesicule, which is where that uterus is going to be full of fluid, and that's what that Prectone or that machine is going to look for, that bouncing back of the structures. Anyway, the problem is that it will have a positive if you hit the bladder. If you're measuring with one of these machines and you hit that bladder, it'll bounce back as a possible positive, even if it's not. So think about that. We have people that are ultrasounding, and you can pay for ultrasound, but we also have a blood collection, so it will be an assay based on enzymes in the blood or hormone levels. That will be way more accurate than something that you can do on your own. So check with your vet when it comes to vaccination. What is his recommended vaccine protocol based on your location? So think about that. Having that relationship with your vet can help you design your herd health plan. There's a big issue in terms of parasites. FAMACHA training, it will help you kind of indirectly um, select those animals that are easy keepers. Okay, so those animals that have a big parasite load, or that have issues with coping with the parasites that are in your system, or that are just weak. FAMACHA can measure the amount of oxygenation in your blood, or anemia. And anemia is caused by a heavy worm, gastrointestinal worm load. Okay, so our recommendation is for you to get FAMACHA certified, and that way you can look at those animals and use FAMACHA as a management tool for selecting those animals. So that worm that we're talking about is called Haemococcus contortus. Haemococcus contortus is the most it's a dangerous parasite, or the most negative issue in terms of keeping sheep and goats in Florida. Uh, so we need to have a monitoring system in place for you to know what the status of your herd or flock. It's a big, prolific shedder of eggs. Very prolific. That means that it creates a lot of offspring, and that's one of the reasons why we have so many issues in Florida with it. It thrives in sheep and goat herds. Cattle and equine don't have a big issue with barber pole worm. So how it works is that that animal that is got a heavy load of worms, it poops those worm babies in the grass. The eggs will develop into that L3, or that larva that is infective. That larva will climb up the blade of the leaf, and then Susie is going to ingest uh, that larva. That larva is going to develop into an adult, and then we complete that cycle. And now Susie is going to be shedding and propagating the issue. That worm is going to drink a lot of that blood, suck a lot of that blood, and that will create a loss of production. Okay. So the way that we've used dewormers in the past is that we treated everybody in the farm every 21 days, and what happens is that the worm that was susceptible to that dewormer was killed, and then we end up with a genetically superior superworm. Okay. Um, So a heavy burden can result in a loss of about half a cup of blood per day per animal. So that animal will have anemia, okay? So it won't have enough oxygenation in its body to basically function. So that affects, its yield. If it's a kid, it won't develop correctly. If it's a pregnant doe, then it will not have the energy to supply those babies inside of her with adequate developmental conditions. I'm not going to go into detail, but basically we have four dewormer categories, and from those dewormer categories, most of them are now the doses are not effective, or we don't have a formal recommendation for goats. We do for sheep, but not for goats in some instances. So these are the based on the Southern Consortium for Small Ruminant Production, which is an organization of land-grant university personnel. These and veterinarians, this is the recommended rate if you are to use dewormers for goats. Use twice the amount of dosage that's labeled for sheep, with exception to levonosol, which is 1.5 rate, and then moxidectin, which is the same amount. So we talk about parasite management, and we have to talk about the way that we manage our pastures. If we have a continuous rotational system or non-rotation, just a continuous pasture access for those animals, they will reinfest themselves. They will reinfect themselves, and then we end up with a heavier worm load than what's acceptable, and you lose a lot of animals, and you have a big issue. There's 6 recommendations in that slide for you to think about. A fecal reduction test is available. We have fecal egg reduction tests are done by professionals. We can also monitor in our farms fecal samples, and there's information online on that as well. Contact your extension agent and we can get you, the right information. Hoof trimming, we talked about it in the previous slides. Very important. We need to learn how to use proper hoof trimming, how often to trim those hooves, and then how to manage the hooves and the length. Also select those animals that have less of an issue. So we have 2 pictures in the screen, before and after. That before, it's how naturally the hooves are going to develop in an untreated animal, and then this hoof, it's from an animal that just got trimmed. Okay, so it has 3 points of balance, 1, 2, and 3. That animal needs those 3 points of balance to have enough traction to maintain its joints in harmony or in order for it not to have issues in the in its joints later on in life. Predators, we have 2-legged predators and we have 4-legged predators, and all of them are an issue. So that's why we have to emphasize on safe spaces for our livestock. For that, I'm going to leave this here for you to look at. These are some of the alternatives for biological control, which means guard dogs, llamas, alpacas, and donkeys. These are the recommendations. And then we have to accept the fact that we are not going to be able to be in the barn with the animals 24/7, so maybe we need to invest in something like this. Lastly, we talk about marketing. These are some of the ethnic holidays where people are going to demand and look for some of your product. We don't necessarily may like goat, I do, but a lot of people didn't grow up with it. Sheep and goat are one of the main staples in other parts of the world except for the United States. So there's a big market in diverse Florida, in areas that are probably urban. So having a Facebook page, advertising your farm, taking pictures of those animals. That's a cheap way of marketing your product. Check with zoning regulations with your veterinarian. We cannot stress this enough. Developing that relationship with your veterinarian is going to save you a lot of heartache. Make sense of all the factors that can be challenges, and think about what we can do in our situation to either grow that sheep and goat operation or maintain it at a level that it's sustainable. Okay. For that we need data, we need fresh pair of eyes. So ask for our help. We are here to help. We are here, like I said before, this is your tax dollars at work. Give us a call. This is my personal information. I'm at the extension office in Hardy County, but we have an extension office in every county in the state of Florida. And even if we don't have a livestock agent in your community, one of your extension agents will get a hold of us and we can get the information that you need. We can schedule farm visits when all of this COVID-19 situation is under control. And we can go from there and help you design and implement some of those sound management decisions when it comes to sheep and goat production in Florida. All right, have a good one, and send us an email, give us a call. We're here to help.